The desert sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the empty highway. In the heart of nowhere, a single diner flickered to life under a neon sign that buzzed faintly against the evening wind, Eldorado's last stop. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sizzling bacon and stale coffee, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you'd left. Olivia Harper wiped down the counter for the umpteenth time that shift, her hands moving on autopilot, calluses rough from years of pouring refills and dodging leers from truckers. At 32, she carried the weight of a life that had promised more. A husband lost to the sands of some forgotten war, a daughter who barely remembered his face, and a town that chewed up dreams like gravel under tires. It started small, that ritual of hers. Every morning, before the dawn patrol of semis roared by, Olivia would fill a weathered shoebox with whatever sweets she could spare, peppermint sticks from the corner store, homemade fudge that tasted of vanilla and quiet rebellion. She'd set it out on the porch with a sign scrawled in her neat handwriting for the road warriors, sweet miles ahead. No one knew why, not really. The locals whispered it was her way of honoring the ghosts, those rumbling packs of bikers who thundered through like thunderheads, gone before the dust settled. But for Olivia, it was a promise kept in the smallest way, a thread to the man she'd loved, who rode with a club that swore oaths deeper than blood. That evening, as the sky bled orange into purple, the door chime jingled like a warning bell. In walked Harlan, the diner's owner, his face twisted in that familiar scowl, eyes darting to the empty register. He was a squat man with a voice like grinding gears, and tonight he carried the scent of cheap whiskey on his breath. "Olivia, we're short again," he growled, slamming a ledger down on the counter. The numbers didn't lie. Tips were drying up, the economy squeezing this speck of a town like a vice. But Harlan's real gripe wasn't the books. It was her. Always her, always. With her foolish habits and that box of candy that drew in stragglers who ordered nothing but black coffee. "You're costing me, girl. Pack up your charity and get gone by week's end." Olivia's heart stuttered, but she kept her gaze steady, polishing a glass until it gleamed under the fluorescent hum. She'd heard threats like this before, felt the noose of eviction tighten around her trailer on the outskirts, where her daughter, little Grace, colored pictures of knights on motorcycles to chase away the loneliness. Grace was 8 now, all wide eyes and tangled curls, asking questions Olivia couldn't answer. "Why don't the bikers ever stay, Mommy? Don't they need a home?" The truth was a scar. Hidden under layers of diner aprons and forced smiles, Olivia's husband Jake had been one of them, a rider with the Iron Vipers, bound by a code that demanded everything and gave back ghosts. Before he shipped out, he'd made her swear, "If the road ever calls you lonely, leave something sweet for the brothers. It'll bring 'em back to watch over you." A promise from a man who never came home, etched into her soul like chrome on leather. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows as if the desert itself was restless. Olivia stepped onto the porch after closing, the box in her arms heavy with the day's offering, chocolate drops wrapped in foil that caught the last light like distant stars. She placed it carefully, the wood creaking under her boots, and whispered a silent vow to the empty horizon. That's when she heard it, a low rumble, building like thunder rolling in from the Badlands. Headlights pierced the dusk, not the harsh beams of semis, but the steady glow of a convoy, 50, maybe more, engines purring with the precision of a heartbeat. They pulled into the lot, a sea of black leather and polished steel, vests emblazoned with faded patches that spoke of battles won and lost. At the head rode Ethan Caldwell, a man forged in the fires of regret. 45 and weathered like old oak, his face bore the lines of too many sunrises chasing horizons that never led home. Scars traced his knuckles, Reminders of a life traded for the Brotherhood after the military spit him out broken. PTSD that whispered in the quiet hours, a family he'd left behind in a haze of bad choices. Ethan had ridden with the Vipers once, back when Jake Harper was his brother-in-arms, sharing campfires and oaths under starlit skies. That promise Jake made to Olivia? Ethan had been there, clapping his shoulder, swearing the club would always have her back. But time and miles had frayed it until a faded photo in his saddlebag, a snapshot of Jake, Olivia, and a baby Grace, pricked at his conscience like a thorn. The bikers dismounted in a symphony of kicks and zips, boots thudding against gravel. Ethan spotted the box first, its contents spilling slightly in the breeze. He knelt, picking up a peppermint, the wrapper crinkling in his gloved hand. "Who's the angel behind this?" he murmured to his second, a grizzled vet named Marcus, whose laugh rumbled like an exhaust pipe. "Been hearing tales up the route," Marcus replied, eyes scanning the diner. "Some waitress with a heart bigger than this dust bowl says it's for us wanderers." Ethan's gaze lifted to the porch light, where Olivia stood frozen, silhouetted like a figure from a half-remembered dream. Recognition hit him like a punch, those eyes, the same quiet fire Jake had loved. She didn't run or call out. Instead, she offered a small nod, the kind that carried weight, without words. In that moment, the air thickened with unspoken bonds, the scent of candy mingling with hot metal and the faint tang of rain on the wind. Ethan felt the old promise stir, a call he couldn't ignore. One gesture, one box left day after day, and now 70 riders, word had spread like wildfire through the network, were here, ready to repay a debt wrapped in sweetness. As the first stars pricked the sky, Ethan approached, his boots deliberate on the steps. "Mom," he said, voice gravel-rough but steady. "Jake sent us." Olivia's breath caught, the world narrowing to this man, this moment, where a forgotten vow ignited like an engine in the dark. Little did she know, this arrival was just the spark. Shadows loomed in the town, Harlan's greed twisting into something darker, threatening the fragile life she'd built. But with the Vipers at her door, the road ahead promised not just protection, but redemption for them all. A family chosen in the roar of engines and the taste of shared sacrifice. The convoy idled, a living wall against the night, as conversations sparked under the diner's glow. Ethan shared stories of Jake around the box of candy, laughter mixing with the ache of loss, while Olivia watched Grace peek from the trailer's window, her small face alight with wonder. For the first time in years, the diner felt less like a cage and more like a crossroads where loyalty's engine revved to life. But as Harlan's silhouette lurked in the shadows across the lot, eyes narrowed with malice, Ethan sensed the storm brewing. This wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of a ride that would test oaths, unearth buried truths, and forge unbreakable chains in the face of corruption's cold grip. The neon sign of El Dorado's last stop flickered like a dying heartbeat against the encroaching night, its pink glow painting the bikers' faces in hues of resolve and shadow. Ethan Caldwell stood on the porch, the peppermint stick still clutched in his fist, its sharp mint cutting through the warm haze of engine oil and desert dust that hung in the air. Olivia's eyes, wide with a mix of disbelief and guarded hope, locked onto his. The words he'd spoken, "Jake sent us," hung between them, heavy as the chain around his neck, a dog tag etched with dates that meant everything and nothing now. She didn't cry. Olivia Harper wasn't built for tears anymore. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the box, steadying it as if it were the only anchor in a world tilting off its axis. "Jake, he talked about you," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint lilt of someone who'd grown up, chasing sunsets in small towns. "Ethan, the one who pulled him out of that scrape in the hills, said you were the brother he chose when blood let him down." The confession slipped out unbidden, pulled by the gravity of his presence, the way his leather vest creaked with each breath, the faint scar running along his jaw like a road map of old wars. Ethan nodded, the motion slow as memories flooded back. Campfires crackling under endless skies, Jake's laughter booming over the roar of Harleys. Promises sworn in the dead of night to watch over each other's kin. He'd failed once, riding away after the funeral, burying the guilt under miles of blacktop. But this box, this daily act of quiet defiance, had dragged him back like a hook in deep water. Inside the diner, the bikers filtered in, their boots echoing on the linoleum like distant thunder. Marcus, broad-shouldered and tattooed with faded anchors from his Navy days, claimed a booth near the window, his laugh drawing others like moths to flame. They weren't rowdy. These were men and women who'd seen the world's underbelly, from desert deployments to back-alley brawls, now bound by a code that valued restraint over rage. A woman named Riley, with silver streaks in her braid and a medic's patch on her sleeve, slid into the seat across from him, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of someone who'd patched up more than wounds. "Smells like home in here," she murmured, accepting a mug of coffee from Olivia, who moved behind the counter like a ghost reclaiming her space. The group ordered simple, burgers sizzling on the grill, fries crisp with salt, coffee black as midnight. But it was the stories that filled the air, weaving through the clink of silverware and the hum of the ancient jukebox playing a forgotten country tune. Ethan sat at the counter, close enough to Olivia to catch the faint scent of vanilla on her apron, a remnant of the fudge she'd baked that morning. "Word spread fast," he explained, his voice low to keep it between them. "Riders from 3 states over, hearing about the waitress who leaves sweetness for the road. Thought it was legend at first. Then I saw the sign, and remembered." He pulled the faded photo from his saddlebag, sliding it across the Formica top. There was Jake, arm around a younger Olivia, baby Grace bundled in his jacket, all grins under a clear blue sky. Her fingers trembled as she touched the edge, the paper worn soft from years of Ethan's silent vigils. Grace peeked from the kitchen door then, her small frame dwarfed by the swinging panels, curls framing a face lit with curiosity. "Are they knights, Mummy, like in my books?" The question pierced the room's warmth, drawing smiles from the bikers. Riley waved her over gently, offering a chocolate from the box. "Something like that, kiddo. We ride to keep promises." Grace's eyes widened as she accepted it, the foil crinkling like a secret shared. For a moment, the diner transformed, no longer a weary pit stop, but a hearth where lost pieces clicked into place. Ethan watched, a knot loosening in his chest, the PTSD shadows retreating just a fraction under the glow of this makeshift family. But the idyll shattered as Harlan burst through the back door, his face flushed crimson under the harsh kitchen light. He'd been lurking in his office, nursing resentment like a bad hangover, the ledger's red ink fueling his spite. "What the hell is this circus?" he barked, gesturing wildly at the crowded booths, his voice grating like sand in gears. The bikers fell silent, a wave of tension rippling through the room, hands pausing mid-bite. Harlan zeroed in on Olivia, jabbing a finger. "I told you to cut the charity crap. Now look, freeloaders turning my place into a damn clubhouse. You're fired, effective now. And that trailer? Eviction notice by morning. Town's got rules against squatters like you." Olivia's stance didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened on the coffee pot. Grace shrank back, clutching the chocolate like a shield. Ethan's chair scraped as he rose, his shadow falling long across the floor. But he held his ground. No fists, no threats, just the quiet authority of a man who'd faced worse than bluster. "Easy there," he said evenly, eyes locking on Harlan's. "These folks are paying customers, and that box, it's drawn more business than your sour moods ever chased away." Murmurs of agreement rose from the tables, Marcus setting down his mug with deliberate calm. Harlan sneered, stepping closer, the whiskey on his breath sharp in the confined space. Paying with what? Stale candy wrappers? This town's mine to run, and I say she's out. Got connections at the sheriff's office. They'll back me on squatter laws. The word hung like a threat, laced with the rot of small-town corruption Ethan knew too well, favors traded in back rooms, justice bent for the highest bidder. He'd seen it in war zones and border towns alike, where men like Harlan preyed on the vulnerable, twisting oaths into nooses. Outside, the convoy's engines ticked as they cooled, a low undercurrent to the standoff. Riley stood then, her voice cutting through like a siren's call. We've got vets here who've given more for this country than you'll ever understand. You evict her. You evict all of us. The room united in that breath, a wall of leather and loyalty forming around Olivia and Grace. Harlan faltered, his bluster cracking under the weight of their gaze, but he spat on the floor and stormed out, the door slamming like a gunshot. As the dust settled, Ethan turned to Olivia, his expression softening. We don't leave promises unbroken. Stay put tonight. We'll sort this at dawn. She nodded, the first real smile breaking through, fragile as morning light. The bikers lingered, sharing more tales, rides through storms, brothers saved from the brink, each word a brick in the foundation of trust. Grace climbed into Ethan's lap uninvited, asking about the shiny horses outside, and for the first time he felt the road's pull shift, not away from home, but toward it. Yet as the night deepened, headlights swept the lot from the highway. Harlan's truck, peeling away toward town. Phone pressed to his ear. Whispers of calls to the sheriff, of leveraged debts and forged claims, stirred in Ethan's mind. This wasn't just a diner spat. It was the first thread unraveling a web of greed that threatened everything Olivia held dear. The Vipers would ride with her, not for glory, but for the honor Jake had entrusted, a redemption etched in chrome and quiet vows, revving toward a confrontation where truth would outride corruption's shadow. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The first hints of dawn crept over the horizon like a reluctant witness, painting the desert in strokes of pale gold and lingering indigo. El Dorado's last stop stood sentinel against the chill morning air, its neon sign now dark and silent, the parking lot a graveyard of dew-kissed chrome where the bikers' machines slumbered. Inside, the air still carried the faint echo of last night's camaraderie, coffee grounds and laughter's warmth, but tension coiled beneath it like a spring wound too tight. Olivia moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, flipping eggs on the griddle, the sizzle a steady rhythm against the uncertainty gnawing at her edges. Grace sat at the counter, legs swinging, munching on a leftover chocolate that had somehow survived the night's chaos, her eyes bright with the thrill of new friends who rode like heroes from her storybooks. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his vest, watching the scene unfold with the vigilance of a man who'd learned to spot storms before the wind shifted. Sleep had evaded him, chased away by ghosts that rode shotgun in his mind. Jake's voice in the dark, promising a future that war had stolen and the guilt of oaths half-kept. The photo lay tucked back in his saddlebag now, but its image burned. A family he'd sworn to shield, now fraying under Harlan's petty tyranny. Marcus joined him, nursing a mug of fresh brew, his broad frame filling the space like an anchor. "Sheriff's in Harlan's pocket," Marcus said lowly, voice rough from years of shouting over engines. "Heard it from a rider who passed through last month. Fines for nothing, evictions on whispers. Man's building an empire on borrowed time, squeezing folks like Olivia till they break." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening as he scanned the empty lot. The convoy had swelled overnight. Word rippled through the Viper's network like a signal fire, drawing more riders from dusty side roads, 70 strong now, a brotherhood forged in foxholes and forgotten rides. They weren't here for spectacle. This was restitution, a quiet reckoning for Jake's memory. But Ethan knew the cost of rushing in blind. PTSD had taught him that much, the way shadows twisted into threats, pulling you under if you didn't breathe steady. "We don't charge in," he replied, eyes on Olivia as she plated breakfast for the early risers filtering back in. "We uncover the rot first. Harlan's not alone in this. Towns whispering about land grabs, favors from the top." As the sun crested, bathing the diner in warm light that glinted off license plates like badges of intent, the group gathered around the counter. Riley, ever the strategist with her medic's calm, spread a crumpled map across the formica, marking spots with a grease pencil. The trailer park on the outskirts, Harlan's ramshackle office downtown, the sheriff's station squatting like a toad on the main drag. "Olivia's lease is ironclad if we dig," she said, her braids swinging as she pointed. Jake filed it himself before shipping out, witnessed by club notary. But Harlan's forging papers, claiming defaults that never happened. Olivia paused mid-pour, coffee steaming in the pot, her face paling as fragments of the past resurfaced. Jake had been meticulous that way, his hands steady on documents even as deployment loomed, whispering, "This keeps you safe, Liv. The Vipers back it." Grace, sensing the shift, slid off her stool and tugged at Ethan's sleeve, her small hand warm against the leather. "Uncle Ethan, will the bad man take our home?" The title slipped out naturally, a child's trust piercing the adult's armor. Ethan knelt to her level, the scent of syrup on her breath mingling with the diner's grease, and met her gaze. "Not if we ride true, kiddo. Promises are like these bikes, built to last through the roughest miles." He ruffled her curls gently, a gesture that unlocked something in him, a flicker of the father he'd never been, the brother he'd strayed from. The room watched, a silent circle of leather-clad guardians, as Grace beamed, clutching a peppermint like a talisman. Outside, the engines stirred to life one by one. A low chorus building as riders checked chains and topped off tanks, the air filling with the sharp tang of gasoline and oiled metal. Ethan stepped onto the porch with Olivia, the wood groaning under their weight, the box of candy now replenished beside the door, a fresh batch of fudge, its edges soft from the night's humidity. "We'll head to town," he said, voice steady against the morning breeze that carried whispers of sagebrush. "Talk to the clerk's office, see what strings Harlan's pulled. You stay here with Riley and Grace. We'll handle the shadows." She searched his face, seeing the scars not just on his skin, but in the haunted depths of his eyes. The man who'd pulled Jake from wreckage, only to lose him to sands far from home. "Why now, Ethan? After all these years?" He hesitated, the wind tugging at his collar, revealing the dog tag that swung like a pendulum. "Because Jake's promise was mine too, and yours. It's called us all back. This family's not blood, but it's unbreakable." The words hung, a vow renewed, as he mounted his Harley, the kickstart roaring like a declaration. The convoy formed up, a phalanx of rumbling steel snaking toward Route 17, dust trailing in veils that caught the rising sun. Olivia watched from the porch, Grace at her side, the box between them a symbol of endurance, sweetness sown in hardship, now reaping a harvest of loyalty. In town, the streets baked under the climbing heat, clapboard facades peeling like old skin, the sheriff's office, a squat brick building with a flag limp in the still air. Ethan led the way, parking the bikes in a line that blocked the sun, their shadows merging into one formidable shade. Harlan was already there, huddled with the sheriff, a portly man named Burrows, badge gleaming falsely under his sweat-stained shirt. Whispers from passers-by rippled, the Candy Lady's bikers, rolling in like Judgment Day. Inside, the air was stale with files and false authority. Burroughs' desk cluttered with ledgers that smelled of ink and deceit. "We need records on the Harper lease," Ethan stated, no preamble, his presence filling the cramped space. Burroughs leaned back, feigning nonchalance, but his eyes darted to Harlan, who lurked in the corner like a weasel in wait. "Public info. Boys, but she's overdue. Debts piling up. Evictions legal." Marcus, at Ethan's flank, slid a copy of the original filing across the desk, its seal unbroken. "Check again. This says different." Tension thickened, the clock ticking like a fuse, as Burroughs scanned the paper, his bluff cracking. Harlan shifted, sweat beading, realizing the web he'd spun was tangling around him. Forged signatures exposed, ties to land schemes unraveling. But as Ethan pressed, Burroughs' hand inched toward a drawer, a radio crackling faintly. Backup called perhaps, or worse, a deeper rot involving out-of-town muscle. The standoff hummed with unspoken threats, the Vipers outside idling engines in support, a thunder ready to roll. Ethan felt the pull of old battles, the moral line blurring under pressure, but he held firm. No violence, only truth's unyielding ride. Back at the diner, Olivia felt it too, a distant rumble vibrating through the ground, binding them in the promise's forge. The day was young, but the shadows lengthened, promising a clash where honor would test its mettle against corruption's grip. 1 mile at a time, the midday sun beat down on the sheriff's office like an unrelenting interrogator, turning the brick walls into a furnace that amplified every creak and murmur inside. Ethan Caldwell stood unmoving, his boots planted firm on the scuffed linoleum, the air thick with the musty scent of old paper and polished oak. The original lease document lay open on Sheriff Burroughs' desk, its edges curling slightly in the stale heat, the ink stark against the yellowed page, Jake Harper's signature, bold and unyielding, witnessed by a notary from the Viper's old chapter. Marcus flanked Ethan, his presence a quiet bulwark, while a handful of riders waited outside, their engines a low, patient hum that vibrated through the walls like a heartbeat. Burroughs shifted in his creaky chair, sweat tracing rivulets down his ruddy cheeks, his fingers drumming a nervous tattoo on the desk's edge. Harlan hovered in the corner, his earlier bluster evaporated into fidgety glances at the door, the whiskey from last night souring his breath into the room. This don't change nothing," Burroughs muttered, his voice a gravelly evasion, eyes flicking between the paper and the bikers. "Harlan's got claims, overdue payments, violations. Town ordinance backs it." But the lie cracked in his tone, exposed by the document's clarity. No defaults, no breaches, just a life secured by a soldier's foresight. Ethan leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, but with the steady pressure of truth's weight. "Ordinance or not, this is forged rot. We've got eyes in 3 counties who've seen your kind before. Land snatched under false flags, families scattered like dust." His words carried the echo of battlefields where deception had cost brothers their lives. And now, in this cramped office, they struck at the heart of Harlan's scheme. The man in question swallowed hard, his face paling as Marcus added, "Riders talked to the county clerk on the way in. Your claims don't match the books. Care to explain?" The radio on Burroughs' belt crackled then, a dispatcher's voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Backup en route, 2 units from the edge of town, their sirens a distant wail growing closer. Harlan's eyes lit with desperate cunning. "You think you scare me. This ain't your fight, biker. Olivia's trailer. It's collateral in a bigger play. Developers circling, promising jobs, progress. She's in the way, and so are you." The confession slipped out, fueled by cornered panic, revealing the web. Harlan's ties to outsiders hungry for the desert's hidden aquifers. The diner's land, a key to pipelines that would choke the small town's soul. It wasn't just greed. It was a betrayal of the quiet oaths that bound places like El Dorado. Protect the vulnerable, honor the ground you stand on. Outside, the convoy sensed the shift, engines revving in unison as Riley coordinated from her bike, her medic's instincts tuning her to the pulse of the group. She kept Grace close at the diner, the girl's small hands busy wrapping fresh peppermints. But now she radioed Ethan. "Hold steady. We've got locals stirring, folks who've lost homes to the same snake." Indeed, as the sheriff's unit screeched into the lot, gravel spraying like accusations, a handful of townspeople gathered at the edges, wrinkled faces under wide hats, murmuring about evictions past, eyes on the vipers as unlikely saviors. Ethan didn't flinch as the deputies piled out, hands hovering near holsters, their postures all bark without the bite of real conviction. Burrows rose, trying to reclaim authority, but his voice wavered. "Stand down, all of you. This is official business." Yet Ethan met his gaze, the dog tag at his throat catching the light like a vow etched in silver. Official, like the promise Jake made to keep his family whole. You evict her, you break more than paper. The words hung, drawing a deputy to pause, his young face flickering with doubt, perhaps a vet himself, recognizing the brotherhood in Ethan's scars. Harlan made his move then, lunging for the leash with trembling hands, but Marcus intercepted smoothly, guiding him back with a firm grip on the shoulder. No harm, just restraint born of discipline. Easy, truth's coming out clean. The standoff stretched, seconds ticking into an eternity under the relentless sun, the air shimmering with heat and unresolved fury. Burrows snatched the radio, calling off the units with a choked order, his bluff shattered as the deputies exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers spread. The sheriff's ledger, hidden in a drawer, held receipts of bribes, ties to the developers that could topple his badge. As the tension ebbed, Ethan pocketed the lease copy, his voice low and resolute. "We're not here to burn bridges, but we'll ride this to the end, expose the strings, protect what's owed." Harlan slumped against the wall, defeated, the fight draining from him like air from a punctured tire. Burrows nodded curtly, the weight of exposure settling on his shoulders, promising a reckoning that would ripple through the town's corrupt veins. Ethan stepped out into the blinding light, the convoy parting like a sea as he mounted his Harley, the engine's roar a declaration of mercy tempered with justice. Back at the diner, Olivia waited on the porch, the box of candy a beacon in the afternoon glare, Grace chattering about Uncle Ethan's big adventure. When the riders returned, dust-caked and unbroken, Olivia's relief washed over her like cool rain, her hand finding Ethan's arm in silent gratitude. "You brought it back," she whispered, the leash clutched like a lifeline. He nodded, the ghosts in his eyes quieter now, redemption's first taste sweet as the fudge she'd baked. But as the sun dipped toward evening, a new shadow loomed, word from a rider scout. The developers, alerted by Harlan's frantic calls, were mobilizing, their influence reaching for the sheriff's remnants and beyond. The Viper's arrival had stirred the hornet's nest, and the road to true protection twisted ahead, demanding sacrifices that would test every bond forged in sweetness and steel. The group gathered inside as dusk fell, sharing a meal that bridged the day's fractures. Stories of Jake's unyielding honor weaving through the clatter of plates, laughter punctuating the resolve. Grace doled out candies like medals, her innocence alight against the gathering dark. Ethan felt the pull of family, chosen and fierce, pulling him from the abyss of his past. Yet outside, engines idled watchful, a thunder held in check as the promise evolved from quiet gesture to unyielding stand. Harlan's defeat was a victory, but the larger corruption festered, promising a dawn where loyalty would clash with power's cold machinery, one honorable mile at a time. If this story touched you, hit that like button. It helps spread these tales of quiet courage far and wide. The evening shadows stretched long across the diner's lot, swallowing the last glimmers of sunset as the bikers settled into an uneasy vigil. Eldorado's last stop hummed with the low murmur of voices, the air inside thick with the aroma of reheated stew and cooling coffee, a fragile bulwark against the chill creeping in from the desert. Olivia moved among the tables, refilling mugs with a steadiness that belied the tremor in her chest, her eyes flicking to the windows where silhouettes of riders stood guard, their forms etched against the deepening blue. Grace had curled up in a booth, her head pillowed on a folded jacket from Riley, the girl's breaths even in sleep, clutching a half-unwrapped peppermint like a dream catcher. Ethan sat at the counter, his fingers tracing the worn grain of the wood, the lease document folded neatly in his vest pocket, a talisman of progress, but one that felt heavier with each passing hour. The confrontation at the sheriff's office had cracked the facade, Harlan's schemes laid bare like exposed wiring, but Ethan's instincts, honed by years of navigating minefields, both literal and figurative, whispered of deeper threats. Marcus slid onto the stool beside him, his massive frame creaking the seat, a fresh scar of worry lining his brow. "Scouts radioed in from the ridge," he said quietly, voice a rumble beneath the diner's soft clatter. "Developer's crew rolled into town an hour back, fancy trucks, suits that don't fit the dust. They're holed up at the old motel making calls. Burroughs is squirming, but he's not folding yet." Ethan nodded, the motion slow, his gaze drifting to Olivia as she paused to tuck a blanket over Grace. The woman's resilience stirred something in him, an echo of Jake's quiet strength, the way he'd patch a brother's bike under starlight, swearing oaths that outlasted bullets. "They're not just after land," Ethan murmured, the words tasting of old regrets. "It's the water under it, the roots through the Badlands. Jake fought for places like this, not to see 'em paved over for pipelines that poison the well." The promise Jake had extracted from Olivia, that simple box of sweets, had become a beacon, drawing not just the vipers, but a moral compass in a world tilting toward exploitation. Ethan felt the weight of it now, his PTSD a shadow that sharpened his resolve rather than dulling it, urging him to stand where he'd once fled. Riley approached from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her medic's eyes assessing the room like a triage. "Locals are trickling in, whispers from the trailer park. They've got stories. Homes lost to eminent domain that smelled like bribes. Wells gone dry after the surveys started." She glanced at the door, where two riders flanked the entrance, their postures alert against the night wind that rattled the sign overhead. The neon buzzed faintly, casting erratic pulses of light across the lot, where the convoy's bikes formed a steel perimeter, headlights dimmed but ready. 70 souls, bound not by blood, but by the unyielding code of chosen kin, had answered the call, a ripple from one woman's quiet act, now swelling into a tide against corruption's current. As the clock ticked past 9, the door swung open with a chime that cut the warmth like a cold blade. In stepped a stranger, tall and angular, in a crisp suit that clashed with the diner's grit, his polished shoes clicking on the linoleum. Flanked by two burly men in unmarked jackets, he carried the faint scent of expensive cologne and urban ambition, a predator in tailored wool. The room stilled, forks pausing mid-air, conversations fading to a hush as the bikers' eyes turned, a collective tension coiling like revved throttles held in check. "Evening," the man said, his voice smooth as oil on water, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Victor Lang, representing Desert Horizon Developments. Heard there's been some misunderstanding about property lines." Olivia froze behind the counter, her hand tightening on a rag, the lease burning in her mind like a shield. Ethan rose slowly, his chair scraping softly, positioning himself between her and the intruders without a word. "Misunderstanding's a kind word for forgery," he replied evenly, his tone carrying the gravel of miles ridden in silence. Lang's gaze swept the room, lingering on the leather vests and scarred knuckles, but he pressed on, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase, slick documents emblazoned with legal seals that gleamed under the fluorescence. The Sheriff's Cooperative. This land slated for progress, aqueducts to bring water, jobs for folks like you. Miss Harper's holdout is delaying permits. We can make it worth her while. Relocation package, cash for the diner. The offer hung, laced with the subtle threat of inevitability, but Marcus snorted from his seat, leaning forward. Progress, like the family's run-off last year, wells capped and promises broken. Whispers rippled from the locals who'd gathered in the corners, widows with folded arms, farmers with calloused hands, nodding in quiet fury. Lang's composure flickered, his escorts shifting weight, hands inching toward concealed bulges that spoke of hired muscle over moral fiber. Ethan felt the old pull, the ethical tightrope where violence tempted, but honor forbade it. This was Jake's legacy, won through truth, not fists. Olivia stepped forward then, her voice steady despite the storm in her eyes, Grace stirring faintly in her sleep. This isn't just land, it's home, my husband's promise, etched in every mile these riders took to get here. She gestured to the box on the porch, visible through the glass, its contents a humble defiance against the man's polished greed. Lang's smile tightened, but before he could retort, Riley's radio crackled, a scout's voice urgent. Trucks moving from the motel, heading this way, heavy gear, not just talk. The air thickened, the diner's warmth turning to a forge of anticipation, engines outside, growling to life in response. Ethan met Lang's gaze, unblinking, the dog tag at his throat, a silent oath. Ride out while you can. We're not moving. The developer hesitated, the weight of the room's united front pressing like an invisible tide, then backed toward the door with a curt nod, his entourage following. The chime echoed their retreat, but the threat lingered, a shadow cast long into the night. As the convoy's lights flared brighter, illuminating the lot in stark relief, Ethan turned to Olivia, his hand brushing hers briefly, a gesture of solidarity forged in shared loss. They'll push harder come morning, but we've got the truth on our side, and that's a road they can't block. The group fortified then, barricading the diner's vulnerabilities with quiet efficiency. Boards over windows, riders rotating watches under the stars that wheeled overhead like distant witnesses. Stories flowed in the dim light, tales of redemptions past, brothers pulled from the brink of despair, oaths renewed in the face of betrayal. Grace woke briefly, slipping her hand into Ethan's, her whisper cutting through the resolve. They can't take our nights, right? He squeezed gently, the child's faith a balm against the encroaching dark, pulling him further from his ghosts. Yet as midnight approached, distant headlights pierced the horizon, engines rumbling like an approaching storm. The developers weren't yielding. They were rallying, corruption's machinery grinding toward a confrontation that would demand every shred of loyalty. Ethan stood on the porch, wind whipping his hair, the box of candy at his feet, a symbol of endurance. The promise that had started with sweetness now burned with the fire of justice, binding the vipers in a ride that would either redeem or break them, one unyielding mile from dawn. The midnight hour cloaked the desert in a velvet hush, broken only by the distant growl of engines slicing through the night like predators on the prowl. El Dorado's last stop stood defiant under the star-pricked sky, its windows bordered with makeshift resolve, the faint glow from within spilling onto the porch where the candy box sat like a sentinel, its contents untouched, a quiet testament to endurance. Ethan Caldwell paced the gravel lot, his boots crunching softly, the cool air carrying the metallic tang of impending rain mixed with the ever-present bite of exhaust. His hand rested on the handlebars of his Harley, the leather grip worn smooth from years of gripping fate, while the dog tag at his throat swung gently, catching moonlight like a whispered oath. Inside, the bikers had formed a circle of vigilance, maps and radios scattered across tables amid half-empty mugs that steamed faintly in the chill. Olivia sat with Grace in her lap, the girl's head heavy with sleep against her shoulder, small fingers still curled around a foil-wrapped sweet. Riley hovered nearby, her braid tucked back, checking a first aid kit with the methodical calm of someone who'd mended more than flesh, souls fractured by loss, now knitting together in this unlikely haven. Marcus leaned against the counter, his voice a low anchor as he relayed updates from the scouts. 3 trucks heavy with gear, bulldozers shadowed but no badges, Lang's playing hard, calling in favors to force a clearance under emergency eminent domain. The words hung heavy, laced with the rot of bought justice, but the room's energy thrummed with unyielding purpose, a brotherhood's pulse that drowned out fear. Ethan paused his pacing as the headlights crested the ridge, twin beams cutting through the dark like accusatory fingers, followed by the rumble of diesel engines that shook the ground. The convoy halted at the lot's edge, a barrier of steel and shadow, disgorging figures in hard hats and suits. Victor Lang at the forefront, his face illuminated harshly by a flashlight, flanked by workers clutching clipboards and chains. No sirens wailed. This was shadow play, corruption cloaked in procedure, aiming to dismantle under the cover of night what daylight had exposed. "Last chance, Caldwell," Lang called out, his voice amplified by the quiet, carrying across the lot like a challenge. "We're within rights. Permits stamped." Sheriff's nod. "Move your circus or we'll plow through." The bikers emerged then, a tide of leather and steel flowing from the diner without haste, their boots a synchronized thud that echoed like war drums tempered by restraint. Ethan stepped forward, the group fanning out behind him. 70 strong, a wall of quiet might that blocked the truck's path, headlights reflecting off vests patched with symbols of oaths unbroken. No weapons drawn, no shouts raised, just presence, the kind forged in foxholes and long rides, where true power lay in standing firm. Olivia watched from the porch, her heart pounding a rhythm against Grace's warmth, the lease document a folded weight in her pocket, Jake's foresight, now alive in this moment of reckoning. Lang advanced, papers rustling in his grip, the wind whipping his tie like a flag of false surrender. "This is progress," he insisted, gesturing to the horizon where phantom pipelines loomed in his vision of empire. "Water for cities, jobs for the forgotten. Your Waitress clings to sentiment, it's costing everyone." But his words faltered as locals emerged from the shadows. Trailer park residents with lanterns in hand, farmers gripping pitchforks not for threat but testimony, their faces etched with the scars of prior losses. An elderly woman named Clara with silver hair pinned back stepped up beside Ethan. "Sentiment, you dried my well last spring, promised compensation that never came. This land's ours by blood and sweat, not your ink." The air thickened with murmurs, the developer's crew shifting uneasily as radios crackled, Burroughs' voice hesitant and strained, breaking through from town. "Stand down, Lang. Feds got wind. Audits incoming on those permits. Harlan's spilling everything." The sheriff's betrayal of his own corruption rippled outward, a chain reaction sparked by the Viper's unyielding light. Lang's face twisted, the polished facade cracking under the weight of exposure. Emails unearthed by a rider's tech-savvy ally, bribes traced to offshore accounts, the web of greed unraveling thread by thread. The workers lowered their tools, eyes darting to their boss, the moral tide turning as whispers of lawsuits and investigations buzzed like desert insects. Ethan held Lang's gaze, his voice steady as the engines idling behind him. "Promises aren't paper, Lang. They're what we leave for those who can't ride anymore. Like Jake Harper, who fought for ground worth standing on." The name landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the standoff, drawing nods from the locals who'd heard the tales around the candy box. Grace stirred then, slipping from Olivia's arms to the porch's edge, her small voice piping up clear and unafraid. "Go away, bad men. The knights won't let you." The innocents pierced the night, a child's faith amplifying the group's resolve, softening even the developer's hardened stares. Lang recoiled, the fight draining from him as the reality settled. Not just bikers, but a community awakened, their unity a force no developer could bulldoze. He signaled retreat, the trucks grinding into reverse with a whine of defeat, taillights fading into the dark like retreating ghosts. The lot exhaled, the tension uncoiling into relieved chatter, hands clapping shoulders in silent victory. No blows exchanged, no blood spilled, just truth's relentless ride, exposing the shadows and reclaiming the light. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, the convoy gathered one last time around the diner. Olivia hugged Ethan tightly, her whisper warm against his ear. "You brought him home in a way." He nodded, the ghosts in his eyes finally stilled, redemption washing over him like the first raindrops pattering on the roof. A family chosen, bonds reforged in the fire of quiet courage. Grace distributed the last candies, each wrapper a seal on the promise fulfilled, while Marcus and Riley planned the ride out, oaths renewed for whatever road lay next. The Vipers departed in formation, engines roaring a farewell that echoed across the desert, leaving Eldorado's last stop brighter, its neon sign flickering back to life. Olivia watched them go, the box replenished on the porch, a daily ritual now laced with hope. Harlan's schemes crumbled under investigation, the developers scattered, the town breathing freer. Justice won not by force, but by loyalty's unbreaking chain. In the distance, Ethan glanced back once, the horizon calling, but his heart anchored here in the sweetness of a vow kept true. Thank you for joining us on this journey of honor and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications for more tales like this.